The morning air felt cool when the homeowner stepped outside with a cup of tea in hand. It had been only a few weeks since he moved into the neighborhood, yet each corner of the street still felt fresh and unfamiliar. The houses all looked neatly lined up, each one almost the same as the next, and the lawns were trimmed with the same care. When he first arrived, he assumed everyone liked things tidy and peaceful. It was one of the reasons he chose this place. He wanted quiet days, friendly neighbors, and a sense of calm after years of living in a much busier town. At first, everything did seem perfect. Neighbors smiled when passing by. A few even waved from their driveways. Kids rode their bikes in the evening on the sidewalks, their laughter echoing between the walls of the houses. Birds would land on the fence each morning, and a gentle breeze would move through the trees in the backyard. These small things made him feel like he made the right choice. Life here had rhythm, and it was a peaceful one. He spent the first couple of weeks unpacking little by little, trying to make the house feel like a home. He rearranged furniture, hung pictures, and planted a few herbs in the small garden bed near the porch. He was still getting used to the silence at night, which was different from the constant noise of his previous location. Here, the nights were calm, almost too calm, and the only sound was the faint hum of crickets. One day, while he was sweeping the front walkway, an elderly neighbor walked over. She had a warm smile, but a tired look in her eyes, as if she carried more stories than she cared to share. They talked for a few minutes about the weather, the neighborhood, and small things that didn't matter too much. But before she left, she said something that stuck with him. "You seem nice. Just don't let the HOA bother you too much. They like things their way. Sometimes too much their way." He didn't think much of it at the time. He smiled, nodded, and continued sweeping. The idea of an HOA being a big problem didn't cross his mind. He assumed they were just doing their job keeping the neighborhood organized and making sure everyone followed the rules. It sounded reasonable enough. A few more days passed without anything unusual. He settled into a routine, waking early, taking walks in the evening, waving at neighbors, and enjoying simple moments of peace. And then one morning, he opened his mailbox and found a white envelope inside. On the corner, he saw the letters HOA. He didn't think anything strange about it. Maybe it was a welcome letter or information about community events. But when he opened it, the words inside made him pause. It was a notice, a warning. The letter stated that the small patch of grass near the walkway was slightly uneven and needed to be trimmed. It wasn't a big issue, but it was written in a tone that made it feel more serious than it should have been. He reread the letter twice, trying to understand why something so small required an official warning. He shrugged it off, telling himself it was probably a standard thing the HOA sent to new homeowners that afternoon. He trimmed the grass carefully. He wanted to avoid any misunderstandings and thought that would be the end of it. He didn't expect anything more. But the next week, another letter arrived. This time, it mentioned that the mailbox paint looked slightly dull and should be refreshed. Again, the issue felt minor. The mailbox didn't look bad at all, just a little faded from the sun. Nothing unusual. He shook his head, wondering why the HOA paid attention to such small things. He thought maybe they were strict, but he still didn't feel bothered. Not yet. He bought a small can of paint, cleaned the mailbox, and applied a fresh coat. It took less than an hour. A few days later, while he was sitting on the porch reading a book, a couple walking by slowed down for a moment. The man looked around carefully before speaking. "You're new here, right?" the man asked. He nodded. "Just keep documents of everything the HOA sends you. Seriously. Photos, dates, everything. You might need them one day." The way the man spoke calm but firm made him feel a little uneasy. He wondered why so many neighbors kept mentioning the HOA. Were they really that difficult? He didn't want to assume anything, but the pattern was obvious. Everyone talked about the HOA like it was something to be cautious around. Still, he tried not to let the comments affect him. He reminded himself that some people simply had bad experiences in the past. Maybe the HOA had stricter periods, and now things were more manageable. Maybe people exaggerated. He didn't want to judge too early, but the third letter changed everything. It arrived on a Wednesday morning. It's tucked neatly in the mailbox like the others. He opened it, expecting another minor notice. Instead, His eyebrows lowered as he read. The letter claimed he had parked his car improperly, as the front bumper extended a few inches over the inner line of his driveway. He walked outside immediately and checked. The car was parked almost perfectly. The bumper barely crossed anything. He stood there on the driveway, confused, reading the letter again. It felt unfair. Too strict. Almost unreasonable. Who measures a few inches over a line when the car is still fully on the driveway? He began to wonder if the HOA actually had a reason for sending these notices. And if they did, what was it? Later that day, he approached the mailbox again and noticed something else. A neighbor across the street was parked in nearly the same way, slightly over the line. Yet there was no HOA letter on their door. No notice. No warning. That was the moment something shifted inside him. It wasn't about the grass, the mailbox, or the driveway. It was about consistency, fairness, and the feeling that something wasn't right. He returned inside and placed all 3 letters neatly in a folder. He wrote the dates on the back of each one and snapped photos of the mailbox, the grass, and the driveway. He felt strange doing it, but after all the quiet warnings from neighbors, it felt like the right thing. In the next days, he tried to ignore the tension building inside him. He still greeted everyone with a smile, still worked on his small garden, still tried to enjoy the evenings. But the idea of being watched, judged, or singled out sat quietly in the back of his mind. A week passed peacefully, till one afternoon when he stepped outside and found a man standing near his driveway. The man wore an HOA badge around his neck and held a clipboard. He didn't smile. He didn't greet him in a friendly way. Instead, he pointed at the driveway like he had discovered something serious. "We've noticed repeated issues with your parking," the man said. The homeowner blinked slowly. "Repeated? I only received 1 notice. And my car is parked fine. It's not within guidelines," the man replied in a sharp voice. "It is," the homeowner said calmly. "I checked your rules." The man frowned, as if he wasn't used to being questioned. "We'll be watching closely. Make sure there are no more issues." The homeowner didn't respond. He simply nodded and stepped back. The man walked away with the same stiff posture, leaving behind an air of discomfort. That evening, the homeowner sat on the porch again, thinking about what just happened. This wasn't normal neighborly behavior. It wasn't friendly or supportive or helpful. It felt like the HOA wanted to intimidate him, push him, maybe even scare him into following rules that seemed more like personal preferences than community standards. He took a slow breath and reminded himself to stay calm. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was following the rules. He paid attention to details, respected the neighborhood, and kept his space clean. He wasn't harming anyone, but the feeling remained, the sense that something bigger was happening. Something that would not stop with a few letters. The next morning, he saw the elderly neighbor again. She walked slowly, leaning slightly forward as she moved down the sidewalk. "Did they visit you?" she asked. He nodded. She sighed. "They don't like when someone doesn't just accept what they say without question. But don't worry. You'll understand soon enough." Her words echoed in his mind long after she walked away. He didn't know what she meant, but one thing became clear. He had stepped into a neighborhood with rules that went beyond the paper they were printed on, and the HOA was just getting started. But so is he. He closed the folder containing the notices, placed it neatly on the table, and sat quietly for a moment. Whatever was coming, he would face it calmly, wisely, and without fear. He didn't know how far the HOA would go, but he also didn't know how strong he could be when pushed. That realization sparked something new in him, a quiet determination. The peace he wanted was still possible, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. The next few days passed in a strange mix of calm moments and quiet worry. The homeowner tried to ignore the feeling that he was being watched, but every time he stepped outside, he felt eyes on him. It wasn't always clear who was looking, but the presence lingered like a shadow he couldn't brush off. Still, he kept his routine steady. He drank tea on the porch in the morning, worked on the garden in the afternoon, and walked around the neighborhood in the evening. But the peaceful moments now had something else. Underneath them, a silent pressure one evening. While watering the plants near the porch, he noticed two people walking slowly on the sidewalk across the street. They weren't talking, but both of them kept glancing toward his house. One of them held a small notepad. He looked down at his plants and continued watering, pretending not to notice. But inside, he felt uneasy. He wondered if they were part of the HOA too. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were just neighbors on a walk. Maybe they just happened to look in his direction. Still, it was strange, and he couldn't ignore it. Later that night, he sat by the window, sipping warm tea and looking at the quiet street outside. Everything seemed peaceful. The street lamps gave a soft yellow glow, and a light breeze moved the leaves on the trees. But even in that peaceful moment, something felt different now. Like the calm wasn't natural anymore. The next morning brought another surprise. He stepped outside to pick up the newspaper and saw a new letter taped to his front door. It was from the HOA again. He paused, closed his eyes for a moment, and took a slow breath before removing the paper. This time, the letter said that his trash bin had been left visible from the street for too long. He frowned, confused. The trash collection had been the day before, and he had taken the bin back inside after work. It was no different from what everyone else did. He looked around the street. At least 3 houses still had their bins out by the curb, but none of them had letters taped to their doors. He folded the paper quietly and went back inside. He didn't feel angry, yet just puzzled. Why him? Why again? And why so quickly after the last warning? He sat at the kitchen table and placed the new letter with the others in the folder. Then he wrote the date on the back. He was getting used to this now, but he still didn't understand it. By lunchtime, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind. The sun was warm, and the neighborhood looked peaceful as always. While he walked, he passed the same elderly neighbor who had warned him before. She gave him a sad smile. "Another letter?" she asked softly. He nodded. She sighed. "I figured they're testing you." "Why?" He asked. "Because you're new," she said. "And because you don't seem like the type who just accepts everything without asking questions." He thought about her words. "But I haven't questioned anything." She gave a gentle shrug. "Sometimes they decide before you even speak." As she walked away, he felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He wasn't looking for conflict. He just wanted to live peacefully. But the HOA didn't seem interested in peace. They seemed more interested in control. That afternoon, he sat on the porch and tried to focus on reading a book. But he kept getting distracted by the memory of the man with the clipboard. The tone of his voice still bothered him. The way he spoke wasn't about helping keep the neighborhood clean. It was about authority. At sunset, he heard footsteps approaching. When he looked up, he saw a younger neighbor jogging by. The jogger slowed down and stopped for a moment. "You're the new guy, right?" he asked. "Yes," the homeowner replied. The jogger wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "You should know. The HOA here picks certain people to keep an eye on." The homeowner tilted his head slightly. "Certain people. Why?" "Depends on who's running the board," the jogger said. "Sometimes they go after people they think won't fight back. Sometimes they go after people they think will. Hard to say. But you're not the first." A strange mix of emotions hit him: confusion, curiosity, and a quiet frustration. He didn't want to be part of any conflict, but it seemed like conflict had chosen him. That night, he took more photos of his driveway, the trash bin area, the mailbox, the front yard. He wanted everything documented. Not because he planned to fight, because he didn't want to be caught. Off guard again, the next day, confirmed his worries, while trimming the bushes near the fence. He noticed a man he had never seen before walking along the opposite sidewalk. The man wasn't dressed casually like most neighbors. He wore a button-up shirt and held a small camera. He walked slowly, pausing occasionally to point the camera toward different houses. When the man reached the area across from the homeowner's yard, he lifted the camera slightly. The homeowner pretended not to notice. But now the feeling of being watched couldn't be dismissed. He finished trimming the bushes and went inside, closing the door with a soft but heavy sigh. This was not normal. Not for a quiet neighborhood. Not for a simple homeowner trying to live peacefully. But But the real turning point happened the following morning. He opened the mailbox and found a thicker envelope than usual. When he tore it open, his eyes widened slightly. This wasn't just a warning. It was a formal notice stating that he could be fined if the ongoing issues continued. Ongoing? He whispered to himself. He had fixed everything. The grass, the mailbox, the driveway. He followed every rule. Yet the notice claimed multiple issues were still unresolved. He felt his chest tighten. Not in anger, but in disbelief. Was this a mistake? Or intentional? He spent the next hour reviewing every detail of the HOA rulebook, reading slowly and carefully. He checked every page, every guideline, every description, and he realized something important. The HOA letters didn't match the rules. Not completely. Not even closely in some cases. They were stretching the rules, twisting them, and expecting him not to notice. Later that day, he walked outside and found the same HOA representative from before, a man with the clipboard standing near a car at the end of the street. He wasn't alone. 2 other board members were with him. They stood with stiff postures and whispered among themselves. The homeowner watched them for a moment, then turned back toward his house. But he heard footsteps approaching behind him. "Excuse me," the clipboard man called. "Out." The homeowner turned around calmly. "We need to speak about the issues on your property," the man said. "I've fixed everything mentioned." The homeowner replied politely. "There are still concerns," the man said, flipping a page on his clipboard. "What concerns?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The man paused for a moment, as if trying to find the answer. "We'll send another letter." The homeowner narrowed his eyes subtly. "Then I'll respond with documents and photos like before." The man pressed his lips together. The other board members looked uncomfortable. "You should understand." The man said finally that the HOA expects full cooperation. "I've been fully cooperative," the homeowner replied, "but I won't accept things that aren't in the rules." The clipboard man stared at him for a long moment, then turned away without a word. The homeowner stood quietly, breathing slowly, feeling the tension settle around him like thick fog. They weren't just strict. They were trying to intimidate him. He went back inside, closed the door gently, and sat down at the table. He thought about everything, every letter, every warning, every strange look from people walking by. It all made sense now. He wasn't imagining any of it, and they weren't done. A couple of hours later, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, he found the elderly neighbor again. Her expression was serious this time. "I heard they talked to you," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. She nodded slowly. "You should be careful. But don't let them scare you. They do this to see who stands their ground." He swallowed lightly. "And if someone does," her eyes softened, "then they back off. But only if you stay calm and strong." He thanked her and watched as she walked away slowly. Her words stayed with him, echoing quietly in his thoughts. That night, he lay awake longer than usual. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything he had learned. He didn't want conflict. He didn't want stress. But he also didn't want to let anyone mistreat him. He had done nothing wrong. And now, he knew he needed to be prepared. The HOA was pushing harder, and he was finally beginning to push back. The calm days were fading, replaced by something heavier. But in the middle of it, he felt something new inside him, something steady, something strong, a quiet strength he didn't know he had, and the HOA was about to discover it too. The morning air felt a little heavier when he stepped outside the next day. It wasn't the weather. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze moved across the street. But something in the neighborhood felt different now. The simple peace he once enjoyed seemed replaced by quiet tension. People still waved when they passed by, but some of their smiles looked unsure, like they weren't sure if they should get involved. He didn't blame them. Living under a strict HOA meant most people preferred to stay quiet. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want a letter on their door. They didn't want to be the next target. He understood that now, but he wasn't planning to hide. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he also wasn't going to let anyone push him around for no reason. He had spent the night reviewing the rules, the letters, and his photos. Everything made even less sense now. The HOA wasn't just strict, they were bending the rules, and he needed to be ready. Around mid-morning, he decided to take a walk and clear his head. As he walked past different houses, he noticed small things, mailboxes slightly crooked, lawns with tiny patches of tall grass, cars parked even more unevenly than his had been. None of them had letters on their doors. No warnings. No reminders. He paused for a moment in front of one house where the owner was raking leaves. "Morning," the homeowner said politely. "Morning," he replied. After a short pause, the neighbor lowered his voice. "I heard the HOA has been giving you trouble." He nodded slowly. "A few letters. And a visit." The neighbor sighed. "They do that when they feel like it. But most people don't question them. They just pay or stay quiet." He studied the neighbor's tired expression. "Has it happened to you?" "Oh, yes," the neighbor said, shaking his head. "A few years ago, they said my fence was 2 inches taller than allowed. 2 inches. I didn't argue. I just fixed it. I didn't want to deal with them." He understood. Not everyone had the time or energy to challenge unfairness, but something inside him felt stronger now. Maybe it was the way the clipboard man spoke to him, or the strange way the rules were being applied. Whatever it was, he didn't feel like backing down. As he continued walking, he thought about the quiet warnings from neighbors. They weren't trying to scare him. They were preparing him. And now he knew why. When he returned home, he saw another letter sticking out of the mailbox. His stomach tightened, but he kept his face calm. He took the letter and walked inside before opening it. He unfolded the paper and scanned the text. This time, the HOA claimed he had failed to maintain a standard appearance for the front garden area. He stared at the words, confused. He had trimmed the bushes, watered the plants, and even pulled out some weeds 2 days before. He walked outside again and looked at the garden. It looked perfectly fine, clean, organized, healthy. He took photos from every angle. Then he took pictures of a few nearby lawns for comparison. Some looked worse than his. Yet none had received a letter. He placed the new letter in the folder with the rest and added the photos. He felt his determination grow with each new piece of paper. He wasn't going to let this continue. That evening, while sitting on the porch, he decided to take the next step. Instead of waiting for another warning, he would attend the next HOA meeting. Not to argue or cause trouble, but to ask questions. Calm questions. Reasonable questions. Questions the board would have to answer. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. He marked it on his calendar. Over the next few days, things stayed mostly quiet. Too quiet. There were no letters, no visits, no strange people with cameras. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. But it didn't bring peace. It felt like the calm before something bigger. On the day of the meeting, he dressed neatly and arrived 5 minutes early. The meeting room was a small building near the community park. When he walked inside, he saw several folding chairs arranged in rows. With a long table at the front where the board members sat, he recognized the clipboard man right away. The man glanced at him but didn't smile. 2 other board members looked up, exchanged quick glances, and whispered something to each other. He sat in a chair near the middle of the room. A few neighbors entered and sat down too. Some looked nervous. Others looked bored, as if they came only because they felt obligated. When the meeting began, the board reviewed basic topics, budget updates, upcoming events, maintenance schedules. Everything sounded normal at first. Then, near the end, the clipboard man cleared his throat. "We have one more matter to discuss," he said, glancing directly at the homeowner. "We have concerns regarding repeated violations at one of the properties." The room grew quiet. A few neighbors turned their heads. The clipboard man continued, "We've documented several issues, including improper parking, visible trash bins, and failure to maintain garden standards." The homeowner raised his hand calmly. "Yes," the clipboard man said, trying to sound neutral. With steady composure, the homeowner stood up. "I'd like to address those concerns," he said. Some neighbors shifted in their seats, curious. He spoke slowly, clearly, without anger. "I've received the letters. I've fixed everything mentioned. I have photos of my property with dates and times, and I have copies of the rules printed from the HOA handbook. Some of the issues listed in the letters don't match the actual rules." The clipboard man stiffened. "Are you suggesting the board made a mistake?" "I'm suggesting there may be misunderstandings," he replied politely, "and I'd like clarification." One of the board members, a woman with a calm expression, leaned forward. "What exactly are you referring to?" He opened his folder and showed the documents. "For example, the parking issue. The rule says cars must be parked fully on the driveway." Mine was. "The letter mentioned the bumper crossing an interior line, but the rule doesn't mention that." A few neighbors nodded quietly. The woman asked, "Do you have proof?" He held up the photo. "Yes, taken the same morning the letter arrived." The board whispered among themselves. The woman examined the paper, but the clipboard man looked irritated. He continued calmly, "The trash bin issue also doesn't match the rules. The bin was brought back the same day as everyone else's, yet I was the only one who received a warning." A man in the audience muttered, "That's true." The clipboard man adjusted his posture. "We monitor violations as we see them." He nodded. "Understood. But when rules are applied differently to different people, there should be an explanation. I'm simply asking for clarity and fairness." The room was silent for a moment. Even the neighbors who tried to avoid conflict were now leaning forward. Listening, the woman on the board sighed softly. "Perhaps we should review the documentation again," she said. The clipboard man looked frustrated, but he didn't argue. After a tense pause, the woman continued, "We can't make any decisions tonight, but we will recheck the records and compare them with the rules. If there were errors, we will correct them." The homeowner nodded respectfully. "Thank you. That's all I'm asking for." He sat back down quietly. The rest of the meeting moved on quickly. When it ended, several neighbors approached him. One woman whispered, "Good job staying calm." "No one's ever questioned them like that before," man added. "You handled that better than I ever could," another said. They needed someone to speak up. He didn't smile widely, but he felt something warm inside, something steady. He hadn't argued, shouted, or accused. He simply presented facts, and people noticed. When he left the building, the night air felt fresher than it had in weeks. He breathed deeply, feeling lighter. For the first time since the letters began, he felt a small shift, a change. Not a victory, but a moment of balance. However, he knew this wasn't over. The clipboard man didn't look pleased, and when someone like him felt challenged, things rarely ended quietly. Still, he walked home with confidence. He had taken the first step. He had spoken calmly and clearly. He had shown he wasn't afraid. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves began greeting him more warmly. Some even approached him quietly, sharing their own experiences with the HOA. Stories of unfair warnings, odd rules, and strange behavior. He listened to all of them, taking mental notes. The more he heard, the clearer the pattern became. The HOA had been doing this for years. Most people gave in, but now, someone had finally pushed back. Then, one morning, a new envelope arrived in his mailbox, thicker than usual. He opened it slowly. Inside was a printed message stating that the board was reviewing the concerns raised and would temporarily suspend all warnings until further notice. Sat down and read it again. They weren't admitting anything, but they were retreating, at least for now. He placed the letter in the folder and closed it with a calm smile. The HOA had pushed him for weeks, but now he had pushed back, and the balance had finally shifted even, if only slightly. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The HOA was no longer dealing with a silent homeowner. They were dealing with someone who paid attention, someone who asked questions, someone who wasn't afraid, and they were starting to realize it. The next morning started with a strange kind of silence in the neighborhood. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like people were watching from behind their curtains. He didn't think much of it at first, but something in his chest felt tight. He tried to ignore it. He had other things to do. Still, he sensed that something was coming. He stepped outside to water his small garden. He liked starting his mornings this way. The air was cool and the sun was just rising. Usually he enjoyed this moment. But today his mind kept drifting back to the meeting with the HOA the night before. Their tone, their confidence, their smirks, it all bothered him. They thought they could scare him. They thought he would just quietly accept whatever they wanted. They didn't know him well enough. He finished watering the plants and was heading back inside when he saw something sticking out from under his front doormat. A white envelope. His heartbeat picked up a little. He bent down, picked it up, and opened it right there. Inside was a note typed in stiff, formal language. It said he had violated multiple neighborhood guidelines and must remove several things from his property immediately. There was no explanation, no signature, nothing to show who had written it. Just a list of accusations. He held the letter in his hand for a while. His face didn't change, but inside, something turned. It wasn't fear. It was annoyance. He could tell this wasn't an official HOA letter. They usually send emails. This felt like someone trying to scare him privately. He went inside and made himself tea. He sat down at his small table and read the letter again slowly. The more he looked at it, the more it seemed like a joke. Whoever wrote it didn't even know the rules properly. But it annoyed him that someone thought they could intimidate him with something so sloppy. He placed the letter on the counter and decided he would not react immediately. If someone wanted a reaction, they weren't going to get one. A few hours later, while he was working on his laptop, he heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, and coming right up to his front door. Then came a knock. He stood up and opened the door. 2 HOA board members were standing there. They smiled, but not warmly. "We hope you got our message," one of them said. He looked at them calmly. "I got a note," he replied, but it didn't have a name on it. Exchanged a look. They probably didn't expect him to call it out so directly. "Well," the other one said, trying to sound casual. "Some neighbors have concerns." "We're just trying to keep the neighborhood in order." He leaned against the door frame. "If you have concerns, send official communication. Not something that looks like a prank." The first board member's smile faded just a little. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning. This time he actually laughed. "A warning? For what?" They shifted uncomfortably. "Your property doesn't match the community appearance standards. Things must be consistent." He raised an eyebrow. "My yard is clean. My fence is legal. My home has no violations. Are you trying to make up problems because I asked questions last night?" One of them cleared their throat. "No one is making anything up." He looked at both of them, unblinking. "Then show me the written rule I broke." "Real rule, not something you typed at home?" They didn't respond. After a few seconds of awkward silence, they mumbled something about follow-ups and walked away. He closed his door quietly. Not angrily, just firmly. But the tension didn't go away. It felt like a game had started. A strange, unnecessary game. Later that afternoon, as he was fixing a small loose screw on his mailbox, he noticed a neighbor across the street watching him. Not in a friendly way. More like someone who had already picked a side. He waved politely. The neighbor quickly pretended to be checking something on their phone. So that's how it was going to be. He didn't like drama. He didn't start it. But he also didn't run from it. That evening, he received another email. This one actually from the HOA's official address. It said they were scheduling a special review of his property. No details, no reason. Just a date and time. He stared at the screen for a moment. The message felt rushed, as if someone wanted it sent out quickly. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. The whole situation was turning ridiculous. They weren't trying to maintain order. They were trying to push him into a corner, but he wasn't the type to panic. Instead, he decided to prepare. He went outside again and walked around his property with his phone camera, recording everything. The clean yard, the well-kept plants, the legal fence, the mailbox, even the sidewalk. He documented every angle calmly. If they wanted to play hardball, he would make sure he had proof. Over the next 2 days, things got even stranger. He noticed small things: a garden tool left in the wrong place, a trash bin slightly moved, a plant pot tipped over. At first he thought it might just be accidents or wind, but it happened too often to be random. Someone was trying to create a pattern. They wanted his yard to look messy so they could send real complaints. He didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, he installed a small security camera above his front door. Nothing fancy. Just enough, and it didn't take long for something to happen. That night, while he was making dinner, his phone buzzed. Motion detected. He opened the camera feed. He saw a shadowy figure walk up to his trash bin and move it onto the sidewalk. Then the person looked around quickly and walked away. He paused the video and replayed it slowly. The figure was wearing a hoodie pulled up, but the shape, height, and walk were familiar. Very familiar. It was one of the HOA board members. He felt something inside him settle, not anger but clarity. Now he understood exactly what they were doing. They wanted evidence. They wanted to say he wasn't following the rules. They wanted to force him into a fine or a warning so he would stop, challenging them, and they thought they could get away with it. But this time, they messed with the wrong person. The next morning, he printed out screenshots from the video. He placed them neatly in a folder. Then he went about his day as usual. Around noon, there was another knock. The same two board members stood at the door again. "We're conducting a preliminary walkthrough," one of them said. He smiled politely. "Of course. Go ahead." They walked around his property, pretending to examine things. He followed behind slowly, arms crossed. They tried pointing out tiny things, a leaf here, a small crack there, but none of it meant anything. None of it broke any rule. Finally, they gathered in front of him. "We still think your home might not be in full compliance," one of them said. He opened the folder. "Before you continue," he said calmly, "you should see this." He handed them the screenshots. They stared at the images. Their faces fell. The silence was heavy. "This is from my security camera," he added. "It shows someone from your board trying to create fake violations on my property." They looked uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. One of them tried to speak, but no words came out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He just looked at them and said, "I will be bringing this to the full HOA meeting. And if needed, to the community legal mediator." They stood there frozen. Then slowly, they nodded and walked away without arguing. The game had shifted now. They knew he had proof. They knew he wasn't scared, and for the first time, he felt like he had the upper hand. But the story wasn't over. The real turning point,
The perfect ending.
he never expected, was still coming. The days that followed felt strangely calm on the surface, but he could sense something shifting beneath it. The two board members who had tried to intimidate him were quieter now. They didn't walk around with the same confident steps. They didn't give him fake smiles anymore. Instead, they avoided eye contact whenever he passed by. He didn't celebrate or brag about the moment he confronted them. He wasn't proud of catching someone doing something wrong. What mattered to him was simple: fairness. He wanted to live peacefully in his home without being bullied by people who thought they could control everyone. Still, he knew things wouldn't just end there. There would be a meeting coming soon, a big one. The HOA had called for a full community review. It was unusual. Normally, their meetings were small, with only a handful of people attending. But this time, he knew more people would show up. Word had spread, quietly at first, then faster. Some neighbors who barely spoke to him before suddenly nodded or gave a small wave when they walked past his house. One even stopped while walking their dog and said softly, "Good luck next week." He smiled politely but didn't ask questions. He didn't want to turn the neighborhood into gossip, but he appreciated the support. The night before the meeting, he sat at his dining table, folder open, documents neatly arranged. He didn't enjoy confrontation. If anything, he wished things never had to reach this point. But he had learned something important over the past few weeks. Silence didn't solve problems. Being quiet was different from being peaceful. He reviewed his notes again, screenshots, dates, times, copies of emails. Everything documented cleanly. He wasn't planning to attack anyone. He just wanted to show the truth. When he finally went to bed, he slept lighter than usual. not from fear, but from anticipation. The next day came slowly. Morning light filled the house. He made tea, ate a simple breakfast, and watched a few cars pass by. Then he got dressed and walked to the community building where the meeting was supposed to happen. When he arrived, he was surprised. The room was already half full. Neighbors who never attended these meetings were sitting in chairs, whispering among themselves. Some glanced toward him with quiet encouragement. He found an empty seat near the middle and sat down. A few moments later, the board members walked in. Their expressions showed they were nervous. He could tell they weren't used to this level of attention. The meeting started with the usual greetings and announcements. Then finally, they reached the topic everyone had come for. One board member cleared their throat and said, "We've had some concerns raised recently about property compliance. We want to make sure the rules are followed for the good of the community." He knew that was the moment they wanted to shift the blame onto him without naming him directly. But this time, the room felt different. People weren't simply listening, they were watching. He waited patiently until they tried bringing up recent violations. Then he slowly stood. "Before you continue," he said in a calm voice, "I think the community deserves the full story." The room went silent. The board member shifted uncomfortably. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. He spoke like someone who wanted honesty, nothing more. "I've lived here respectfully. I follow the rules. But in the last weeks, I've received letters that were not official. I've had board members come to my home without clear reasons. And," he paused briefly, then lifted the printed screenshots. "I have proof that someone from this board tried to create fake violations on my property." Whispers erupted in the room. People leaned forward in disbelief. One board member tried to interrupt, but he held up a hand subtly, not to silence them aggressively, but to say he wasn't finished. "These are screenshots from my security camera," he continued. "They show someone moving my trash bin onto the sidewalk at night. And the person in the video is a member of this board." A low wave of murmurs spread across the room. One neighbor even stood up and said, "This is exactly what some of us have been talking about." Another neighbor added, "They fined me twice for something I didn't even do." The meeting was changing fast. What was supposed to be a quiet intimidation attempt had turned into a community awakening. The board members tried to explain, but their voices lacked the confidence they once had. Everything they said sounded uncertain, shaky. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't push too hard. He simply said, "I believe we all want this neighborhood to stay peaceful. But peace comes from fairness, not fear." Those words seemed to settle over the room. People nodded. It was something simple, but true. After some discussion, one neighbor suggested, "We need new elections. This board has too much control and no transparency." More people agreed. Hands went up. Voices grew stronger. By the end of the meeting, a decision was made: an immediate vote for temporary suspension of the current board and a new election within the month. The two board members who had tried intimidating him looked pale. They avoided eye contact with everyone as they gathered their papers. He didn't feel victorious in a petty way. He simply felt relieved. The meeting ended with people approaching him to thank him. Some shared their own stories of being bothered by the HOA. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner. He walked home with a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The afternoon sun felt warm on his back. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe normally again. The following weeks were refreshing. People were kinder to one another. Neighbors who barely spoke before now chatted casually at mailboxes. The atmosphere felt lighter when election day came. The community chose a new board, people who actually listened, people who wanted improvement, not control. A few days after the election, he received an official letter from the new board. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple message. "Thank you for standing up when others couldn't. All false charges against your property have been cleared. We aim to rebuild trust in this community." He read it twice, then placed it gently on his table. That evening, he stepped outside onto his porch. The air was soft, and the neighborhood felt peaceful again. Kids were playing down the street. Someone was grilling food. People laughed lightly. He looked at his home, his yard, the simple things he had cared for from the beginning. After everything that happened, he felt stronger, not because he fought, but because he stayed calm, patient, honest. He leaned on the porch rail and took a deep breath. The HOA tried to intimidate him. They tried to corner him, scare him, and push him into silence. But the ending. The ending was something they never expected. Fairness won. Truth won, and he finally got the peaceful life he wanted, the perfect ending he didn't even know was coming.